Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Free West Media YouTube channel. In fact, this is going to be Cape Town is Not Safe, Part 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as we've got some exciting interviews and talks coming up. And again, I'm privileged to be talking to Katia Beeden down in Cape Town, and she's got a lot of experience of crime and mayhem in Cape Town. Good afternoon, Katia.
Hi, Dan. Nice to be back.
Yes, a lot of our viewers said that last time we ended a bit abruptly because, I'd sort of run out of time. But so we are going to pursue the conversation about crime in South Africa, and especially in the light of, Julius Malema's calls for expropriating land, and he's accusing white people of stealing black assets, which something like that has actually never happened, as far as I know, in South Africa. Maybe here and there were isolated incidents, but there's never been. I mean, if black people drive through a white area, they would never have to lock their car doors or anything like that. Nobody would ever attack them by throwing bricks through their car windows or trying to, grab their handbags and stuff like that. It's just. I mean, in most, yeah, majority white areas in South Africa, it's almost as safe as in Switzerland. Well, not that any country in Europe is that safe anymore, but it's no different to any other Western country. It's but when you go towards to the other areas, that's when you really run into problems. Is that
Yeah,
not your
stealing.
experience?
Yeah, I think not just my experience. I think you can speak to any South African and they'll have one or 10 stories of having been robbed or burgled or have been a victim of petty theft. I mean, just for me, just following on from my list of crime experiences in our first discussion. For example, I just decided one day to go for a run on the promenade in Sea Point. And when I got back to my car, it had been broken into and everything had been stolen out of my boot. So, just a casual jog ended in, having to go to the police station to report the break-in and getting the window fixed and that whole drama. And and I think what's really, I suppose, really hurt me in a way is my experience of stealing that's happened within my own home. So I have had three domestic workers that have been in my employ. And the first two stole from me and got caught. And I just chalked it down to bad character. And I had to fire them, unfortunately. Very unpleasant, but you have to. So when my third domestic worker came into my orbit, my partner and I at the time thought we had made a really wise choice. She'd been recommended to us. She had worked for a company as a tea lady. So she came very highly recommended, and she ended up working for us for about 3 years. And I really, really trusted her. And I considered her part of the family. I mean, we paid for her children to go to college. We paid her almost double the rate that you would normally pay a domestic worker. We traveled a lot, so we were away for 2, 3 months of the year. And the times that we were away, she was on full pay, but she had that as leave. I paid for her medical. She got bonuses. I mean, she was really, really, really looked after, and I trusted her. And then found out that she had been robbing me blind, stole all my jewelry, stole perfume, stole clothing. And I didn't want to believe it. I mean, I could feel it in my gut, but I just didn't want to believe it. And eventually had to come to terms with the fact that this person that I trusted, the third person that had been in my home, had literally robbed me blind. And after that experience, I vowed never again. And to this day, I do all my own all my own housework, my own ironing, clean my own windows. And you know what? I do it with joy. I just cannot have anyone else in my house. The trust is broken. But I think I've mentioned before, I was a digital nomad for a while, so I didn't have a car because I was traveling a lot. So I used a lot of Ubers. And I really got to know the Uber drivers here in Cape Town. And they're mostly driven by Zimbabweans and the Congolese and Rwandans, and so Africans from all over the continent. And I am someone who talks a lot and I enjoy just engaging people. So I had a lot of interesting conversations with these Uber drivers and learned a lot about Africa and what's happening in the townships and on the ground. And I bounced the story off a lot of them. And I said to them, I just please help me understand something. I've had three domestic workers that I really loved, that I treated like family. And I'm just so devastated at how I got betrayed and robbed blind by them. Like, am I just unlucky? Am I just not choosing right? Like, why? And I just wanted them to give me some insight. And all of them laughed. They laughed and they said, um, from their perspective, it's their right to steal from you. They see you as someone who has means, who got those means because you had an advantage because of apartheid. So they see stealing from you as their right, and they will steal from you. You see it from the moral perspective of it's theft, it's stealing, you don't do it. But from their perspective, it's like, you've got, I don't. Of course, I'm going to take from you. Of course, I am, you know, and you're just stupid for not seeing it. And that really got me thinking. That really hurt me. I'd never thought about it culturally like that. That as a white person, I was seen as this source of money or source of cell phone. And that kind of then clicked for me. Oh, well, no wonder why when I was sitting on the beach, they could just take my cell phone out of my hand. Or when I was attacked on Lion's Head, of course we're going to just take her cell phone. And there's no feeling of guilt. There's no feeling of I'm stealing. I'm just seen as someone with means and it can just be taken off of me. And I just think it's really sad that the sort of more uneducated massives have been fed this lie that us white minority have somehow got these means in an unethical way, and it's our fault that they don't have means, and it's their right to take from us. And no one's actually looking at the ANC government and saying, well, they actually haven't given the housing and the jobs and the plumbing and the schooling that they promised their people. They're the ones that have looted and stolen the money and not built the infrastructure for their people. And I think they've spun the story that us white people have stolen from them to hide and cover their own ineptitude and their own criminality. And it's created a very toxic narrative. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, yes, I'm not too sure if it's this ideology, this kind of anti-apartheid narrative, or the narrative about apartheid that's created this. I think it goes back a lot further because even in the 19th century and, early 20th century and so on, there was actually also a lot of theft going on. And I know somebody in my family was a policeman on the Lesotho border, high up in the mountains in the Drakensberg near the town of Rhodes. And they had to patrol the border on horseback because there was so much stock theft cross-border stock theft going on. And, stock theft is something even now, today, which is a huge problem. And I also referred to, of course, I think last time to, the first explorer who visited West Africa found that there were two kinds of wars, the Kili Wars and the Tigria Wars. And the Kili Wars was sort of more like Western type of conflicts. But the Tigria Wars, they were more about just, attacking the next tribe and at the end of the rainy season. And they would know that they have some provisions there and they would just steal it. So I think it's very ingrained. It might be a controversial thing to say, but I think it's sort of ingrained in African culture that it's fine
Survival
to
of the fittest.
exactly. And if somebody is not from your tribe, yeah, there's no moral problem with going to steal from them. And I think that's part of the problem, I would say. Oh, yes, if you think about Cape Town, of course, the most famous author produced by Cape Town was J.M. Coetzee, who got the Nobel Prize for Literature. But in his very first book, in Dusklands, there's a scene there where the main character, who's sort of his namesake or maybe his ancestor, Jacobus Coetzee, he's on his ox wagon and he's trekking into the interior, and then eventually he gets very ill, and then there are these indigenous people, most probably Khoisan people, and they just get onto his wagon and take all his stuff, and he cannot convey to them the notion of private property, that stuff belongs to him. To them, it's just something that's arrived and they can just help themselves. So I think that notion of private property, I mean, that's also, well, it's inscribed in our law, of course, and we've got Roman Dutch law, which goes back to Roman times. But I think there is a problem. There's a sort of a cultural problem there as well that we are not really dealing with. And together with this kind of left-wing kind of, you've been exploited. You're the proletariat that's been exploited by the racial capitalist system for decades. So now it's your right. There was some surplus value created that actually belongs to you. So you might as well steal it from the next white person. There could be something to that effect as well. But South Africa is now, as we know, the world champion of crime and theft and robbery. It's also the world champion in inequality. So we've had 30 years of this Afro-Marxist government, if you could call it that, or this quasi-communist government, and we are more unequal now than ever before. And it's also being created by this elite, the black elite, that has enriched themselves via the state and through these so-called, these DEI programs and affirmative action and BEE and all of that stuff. And they are also now extremely wealthy. And in fact, there are statistics that, Herman Giliu quoted a very interesting statistic once. I think in the early 1960s, after, say, almost 2 decades of so-called apartheid or racial segregation, the old system under the National Party, there had been no significant increase in the mean wealth of white people and especially Afrikaners. I mean, most of the money was actually spent on infrastructure and education, including black education. And then there was a similar statistic that I read. It was in F.J. van Jaarsveld. He's also a very well-known Afrikaner historian, and he wrote a piece which was published in a German book in 1986. And at that time, despite having been in power for about 4 decades, Afrikaners still only controlled about 25% of the economy, which was mainly agriculture and the state-owned enterprises. So they didn't use their political power to actually enrich themselves from, say, by getting shares in other companies and
I
that
think
sort
you've
of
just
thing.
touched on something. I think you've just touched on something
Sorry,
important.
I think your connection just broke up a little bit. Hello?
The top here in South Africa is all criminal. It's all state owned, it's all looting, it's all stealing. So that is setting the precedent of what happens down here. So I
Exactly.
think that's also why we've got such a massive problem with stealing, because up here is saying, hey, it's fine, this is what we do. So it's okay. So the man down here thinks, well, if they're doing it, we can do it. So there's no moral code.
It
And like
is.
you said, where the Afrikaner didn't really do that. They used the money to build infrastructure, which is what state-owned money is supposed to do. It's supposed to build the country and build infrastructure for the people. And we've just got a whole culture of just stealing, stealing, stealing. Everyone just steals. It's terrible.
Yes, looting and grabbing. There was that. Well, one of the books written by a left-wing journalist, I've forgotten his name now, but the title of the book is about Eskom, and the title is "License to Loot," and that more or less
Sums it up.
sums it up.
Yeah.
License to loot. The ANC is just looting. There's looting going on everywhere. And as you say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I think the people lower down, they see all this looting and they see these people driving past in 4, 5 million rand cars and vehicles and so on. And they reckon, yeah, well, I should just join the party and try and steal as much for myself. But
And it was very rich. You started off speaking about Julius Malema and his latest talk about how he's accusing us of stealing the land. And that's very rich coming from him after the whole VBS bank scandal, where he's accused of completely robbing and looting, old people of their pensions and their life savings. And then he's accusing us, white minority, of stealing the land. Well, that's very rich. The pot calling the kettle black, as the saying goes.
Exactly. Yeah, he was involved in all kinds of
Hmm.
embezzlement there at the VBS bank. And the only reason why I think eventually, because he also ran into tax problems as a result of that, because he got this money from VBS Bank and he never repaid it. So if you get a loan from the bank of 20 million and you don't repay that, then eventually SARS will say, but that's income in your hands, and then
Mhm.
that's taxable. So
Mhm.
you've had the benefit of the 20 million without paying anything back. So that's taxable. And he was almost declared insolvent by SARS. And that would have prevented him from becoming an MP. And
Mhm.
the only reason why he's an MP today is because that file was went missing after an armed robbery at the judge's house, who was writing the
The
judgment.
irony.
The irony, yes.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
given. I'll one day go into the full story of that. It's a very dark story.
Mm.
Um,
So should
so
we get back
yes,
to, yeah, I mean, just coming back to crime. I mean, crime is just so endemic in our culture. It's just so part of the South African fabric. And stealing. It's
exactly. And I grew up in Springs on the East Rand. I even wrote last year. I wrote a long piece in the Report newspaper about that because there were some very bizarre things that happened there. For example, there was a modernist classical concert, uh, that was put on by Igor Stravinsky in the Black Township Quatema in Springs. And I wrote a whole piece about that. But growing up there, we weren't that exposed to crime when I was a child. I can remember we had a burglary once, and then the police came out and they took fingerprints. And a detective was sent out. The uniformed police came first, and then the detective came and they took fingerprints, and they really tried their best to solve this crime. I mean, nowadays, if you report a burglary, the police, I mean, they just fire it away and they don't care. They don't even try to solve that crime.
I
But
stopped
then
reporting off.
we we moved to Johannesburg, and when I was at high school, and then um, we we stayed in Bramley, which is not too far from the Alexandra township. And there, for the first time, I was really exposed to crime. And they burgled us about once every 6 months. We
Wow.
would sort of replace our clothes and electronic goods and hi-fi system and all of that. And then 6 months later, they would be back and they would clean us out again. And eventually we had alarm systems and we locked all the doors in the house. For example, if when we went out, we would lock all the interior doors in the house. But eventually
Mm.
they came through the roof. They actually, broke the tiles on the roof and they would climb through this and they would break the ceiling and get into each individual room that way. And I know, there's a woman living not too far from here on a small holding, and she sleeps with a gun next to her every night. And she's also got an iron gate closing off her bedroom from the rest of the house. So even if if these robbers get into the house, they would still have to get through the iron gate to get to her bedroom, and she's armed as well. And she's also had to use her firearm on quite a few occasions. And there have been robberies there in around her property there, say next door and so on, where there were there were shots fired and people running, and so
See, this is the
that's
problem. What used to be on the farms in the rural areas, which started in the sort of 15, 20 years ago with lots of farm murders and targeted farm murders against the white minority was happening. What's happened now is what you're describing. That violence and that robbery and that crime is not just happening in the vulnerable areas right now. It's happening in the suburbs. Yeah, you've got a woman in the suburbs in Johannesburg sleeping with
well, it's
a
not
gun under
exactly a suburb, but it's sort of it's a small holding, but it's really
Oh, so she is on a
close.
small holding. Oh, so she's
She
a
is,
little bit. Oh, so she is quite
no,
vulnerable.
yeah,
Okay. No,
yeah.
all right, fair enough. So a little bit on the outskirts. Okay. It's
But
brave in
some of
this
the
day and age.
stuff, some
Ooh.
of the yeah, well, her children wanted to just sell the place and
Ooh.
move to Cape Town or to the Western Cape, where you are. But you're saying
You need
it's
to be
not.
in a gated community. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's got to the stage now where you've got to have a gated community.
But some of the stuff here, because of the lackadaisical police, it also breeds a very sinister culture of crime and fraud and so on. And I know uh, quite a few years ago, it must have been 15 years ago or so, there was actually a black woman living not too far from me in this area, which is a gated community. And she, and there wasn't much publicity about this. There was only a report in the Afrikaans newspaper, Beeld, and that's where I read the story. And she had a racket running. I mean, this is something that's so bizarre and so gruesome that it sounds like one of those Scandinavian kind of horror detective stories. In Scandinavia, up until recently, it was so safe that people had to dream up these stories, these fictions about murder and so on. Whereas in a country like Sweden, there are 46 murders per year. Here
Not
we've
well,
got,
no, with their immigration problem now, those figures are not quite the same. Their rapes and stuff have gone
sure,
right up now. I mean, they've got
that's
a
true,
massive
but I
immigration
think the
problem in
official
Europe now.
murder
But it
statistic,
used to be
yeah,
very
is
safe.
about
Not anymore.
46 murders per year,
Yeah,
whereas here
that's
it's
not.
about 50 per day. So we've got
Yeah.
365 more murders than Sweden does. But this story went as follows: this woman, she would get prostitutes in Hillbrow um, murdered. Well, first of all, she would take out. Okay, there was bribery going on at the Department of Home Affairs, and she would get, an identity document for a fictitious person with a certain name, say a woman with a certain age, and then she would take out life insurance on that person's name,
Yeah.
and then they would go and kill some low-life person, a prostitute or whatever, in Hillbrow, and then
Disgusting.
disfigure the corpse so as to be unrecognizable. And then the death certificate would be made out in the name of this fictitious person in whose name the life insurance had been taken out. And this went on for a few years. And eventually, she was extremely wealthy. She had 20 or 30 million rand of payouts from the insurance companies. And the police, there were actually complaints and so on made to the police, but nothing happened. And it was only when one of the insurance companies started to make a big fuss about it, to saying, how's it possible that this woman would be the beneficiary of all these murdered people who would be dying one after the other. And about 20 of them were killed like that before
Wow.
eventually, the whole thing was blown wide open. And then she was eventually arrested on a murder charge and so on. But
That points to
imagine,
another big issue in this country is that criminals aren't scared of our police force because they know that 9 times out of 10 they're going to get away with it, and if they are arrested, they're going to just be released. So just as you can see with the negligence in this case, criminals aren't scared in this country. We don't really have law and order at all.
yes, I think the official statistic is that 8% of murder cases get solved. So you've got
Yeah.
literally a 92% chance of getting away with murder in South
Literally.
Africa.
Yeah,
A
that's why
friend of
crime is so
mine
right.
who he actually accidentally almost killed a policeman. And then he was on a criminal charge and they accused him of murder, but it was by accident because he saw these people with guns getting out of a car and he thought they were going to start hijacking or something, and he had just come from his shooting club, and then he took out his gun and he shot them. And then he was up on a murder charge, but he told me sort of very laconically, he said, unless you make a confession in South Africa, your chances of the criminal justice system actually finding you guilty is close to zero because it's so inefficient. The files get lost. The the investigating officers don't do their job. Eventually, the case just falls apart, and the criminal
Free for
walks
all.
away scot free.
Yeah, it's tragic. It's really, really, it's so disheartening. It is just so disheartening. It really is. You know, it's
Yeah,
sad,
it is
broken.
sad. And it's been such a big change. I mean, I've seen the change in my lifetime from a time when it was fairly safe, unless you were also, but a victim of burglaries and so on. But it wasn't as violent as it is today. You didn't have shootouts in the street, or car hijackings next to the shopping center and things like that. On a WhatsApp group here, now and again, they tell us, oh, yeah, so and so has been carjacked or hijacked in a car.
I actually had to get out of I was on two WhatsApp groups here in Cape Town for a couple of years, and it was about 3 or 4 months ago. I actually just left those groups. I just found that the amount of crime that I was being exposed to through those groups on a daily basis was wreaking havoc with my mental health. So I actually just decided to just leave those groups. It was just too much. And it just goes to show how much crime there is. I don't know how active your group is, but yeah, I couldn't bear it. It was making me paranoid to go out anywhere. Just being made aware of how much crime there was. You might
Exactly.
just around me at any given point all the time. It was just like, oh
Yes,
no.
my sister always also lives in a place. It's almost like a small holding, although it's not really rural at all. And their WhatsApp group is also rife with news like that. And her house is the only one in her neighborhood that has not been burgled. But that's only because she's got quite a few German Alsatian dogs running around that are quite aggressive and so on. And so, but on one occasion, all her laptops were stolen. I
Mm,
think, and it was also sort of an inside job, and she
it often
lost
is.
months and years of work on those laptops. In fact, my own laptop, I don't really use a laptop all that much, but I do have one when I travel and so on. And this particular one had a lot of valuable data on it, something that I'd been working on for at least a year. And one day I had to go to court in Pretoria, and I thought, I might need it there, take some notes or something like that. And so I took it along, but I thought I didn't want to walk on the street carrying a laptop. So I'd leave it in the boot of my car. And they stole it out of the boot of my car.
There
And
you go.
apparently they've got somebody then afterwards told me that they've got these gadgets to tell them whether there's a laptop in a car. I mean, if you don't switch the thing off completely, it's just on standby. You just close the lid, Then they actually can tell there's a signal coming from the computer, and they pick it up, and then they
Crime is an
steal it
art
out of
form
your
in this
car.
country.
Yeah, and
I
when
mean,
I had to
oh,
when I had to go to the police station, I think it was on a Friday afternoon. Not that there was any chance of getting it back or anything like that. And it wasn't even insured. So I just went to the police station just to have some record that it was stolen. And then there was a whole queue of people, with other reporting other crimes, and once you once you hear all the other stories there, it's just astonishing. I mean, this place is just rife with crime.
yeah,
It's it's
we've normalized it. It's only now that we're starting to talk about it that we're realizing that this is actually not normal. And on top of that type of crime, just bringing it back to Cape Town, I mean, other types of crime, and other types of violence that I've experienced is, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a whole issue with the taxis in Cape Town, and they were protesting that the fact that they were Ubers, because in their mentality, we can't all share business. It's not a capitalistic mentality, all right? So they see Uber as a threat to their business. Now, if you're using Uber and not one of their taxis, now you're taking away business. And it was still during that time frame before I got my car. And I had to take a Uber from town to Hout Bay to look at a property and then back to town. And the next thing, there's this group of people throwing rocks at the car, at the robots, at the traffic lights. And the Uber driver was like, get down. And I had to get down, and there were all these rocks. And he managed to talk this group down, and he managed to get us out of there. But that's just another example of just another type of crime, another type of violence that we subjected to, over and above the stealing and the burglary and all of that. There's a lot of that sort of violence going on as well. So South Africa is a is a is not a safe place. It's quite a violent society, and I just don't think we should be normalizing it anymore. I think it's time we all started talking about it and naming and shaming. This is not okay. It's not okay to
exactly.
live like.
You're right. We shouldn't have to live like that. And this government is completely useless. And I feel, um, y- yeah, I would call myself an early adopter, because I was just about the first person in my kind of peer group who bought a computer. And people asked me, but what do you want to do with it? And and I was also one of the first people to get a cell phone when it was still doing the testing phase. That time I worked in the dealing room at Standard Bank, and I was the only person with a cell phone. And everybody wanted to borrow my cell phone. I want to go out for lunch quickly, but I've got a position, and maybe can I just borrow your cell phone? Which I wasn't. I mean, I had to kind of. It's a very delicate situation. I didn't really want to lend out my cell phone, but if somebody had some big position on the line, I mean, I couldn't really refuse. So, but when it comes to my early insight, in 1987, I attended some conference in Stuttgart in Germany, where there were some of these exiled ANC people present, living in Europe, living in Eastern Europe and Poland and East Germany and so on, as well as in Sweden. And when I saw that lot there, I realized that if ever these people had to run our country, it would be an absolute disaster. But unfortunately, it's taken other people now 30 years to come to that realization. They couldn't see it back then. And I think it was a huge mistake to get the ANC to run, to just hand everything over to them on a plate, the police service and the courts and the army. And since then, they've just been busy filling their own
Destroyed.
pockets and destroying and things, and not maintaining them. I mean, the municipalities are in a complete state of disarray, most except outside the Western Cape. It's just a
Mhm.
complete disaster. There are many small towns without water, and even in Johannesburg, there are all these water problems, and and potholes and whatever. I mean, now I know our estate here, they've actually adopted the traffic lights in the area. So they maintain them now, not the municipality. So it's extraordinary what's happened here. And we've got to actually now start addressing this problem. Honestly, we've got, and I think a lot of people are now fed up with it, of all races and all cultures. They are fed up, and it's
We've
perhaps
been pushed too far now. It's just I just think it's breaking point now. It's just as but in many ways we have just been frogs in the water. And it's just been one thing, one thing, one thing on top of another, on top of another. And it's just one burglary too many, one rape too many, one robbery too many. It's just one more municipality collapsing. And I think it's breaking point now. I think everyone's just had absolutely enough. And just coming back to crime, and we've been talking about crime, in Joburg, in Cape Town, and all our different experiences. What's interesting to me as well is when I started talking about my experiences of crime on X online, suddenly a whole lot of other people were also mentioning their stories and we were sharing our stories. And as I started sharing my stories and growing my following and kind of commenting a little bit more on politics, I wrote this sort of open letter to the president, just expressing my disdain at
mm,
just all these different layers going, going, going. And that post went completely viral and got over 1 million views. But what was interesting about that experience is it attracted a whole lot of South Africans to my page. And unfortunately, the majority of the people it attracted were what I call the radical far leftist trolls.
okay.
um, Right. And whereas crime had always been out there for me, suddenly now I was being attacked for speaking about crime. I was being attacked for telling the truth. I was being verbally attacked for calling out the ANC and the government and calling out crime and actually starting to speak about this. And instead of other people jumping in, well, a lot of people jumped in and kind of supported me and shared their stories. I was quite shocked by this vast majority of radical far leftist trolls that basically started giving me death threats and started doxing me and sharing my information online and calling for me to be killed and calling for me to be deported. Um, and it got really, really violent where they got some of my personal information. I had to delete a whole lot of posts because they were trying to dox me publicly. And then they started threatening to get my address. And I got a whole lot of menacing phone calls and fake links of people trying to get my address. And then I got message saying, "We've got your address." Now you're not sure if people are bluffing or not. So it's very unnerving to suddenly have all these sort of death threats and calls for me to be deported coming at me online. So this whole talk about crime and violence, it's not only happening out on the streets, it's also happening online. And I think what's really sad about our society and really toxic about the South African mentality is I think crime and violence is just so interwoven into many people's DNA, especially these radical far leftist trolls, that when you start calling for a healthier society or you start calling out crime or wanting things to be better, instead of them wanting that as well, it's like they want more violence. They want to carry on stealing. They don't want to be called out for it. So we're fighting. I almost feel like we're fighting a losing battle. I don't see how you can shift a mindset. I don't see how you can shift culture. It's just violence. It's not just crime, but violence is so endemic in the South African culture. And I personally, not to sound negative, because I've always labeled myself an eternal optimist, but I've kind of lost hope, to be honest. I just think the violence and the crime is so big, is so endemic. I just don't see how we can turn the ship around. I don't know what your thoughts on that. I don't know how much hope you've got, but I personally,
Well, I think people, I've sort of towards the early 2000s, I think, once I'd left my corporate job, and, I started reading a lot of history and I thought about things a lot as well. And, if you look at the 19th century, it was also pretty grim, no, not so much down in the Cape, but in the Free State and the Transvaal. Um, there were also lots of massacres and robbery and stock theft. And there was a hunting party here. I mean, they've changed the name now, but the town of Potgietersrus was actually named after this guy. Um, his name was what? Well, Adrian Potgieter or something like that. And he and about 16 other people were on a hunting expedition, including women and children. And the black tribe there, they just under Chief Mikado, they just killed them all, and they left Adrian Potgieter lost, and they skinned him alive. They flayed him alive. I mean, it was just
That's the violence, the level of
yeah.
violence we're talking about. I mean, it's
Exactly.
just
And today that town is named after him, after the chief who gave that order. That's where we are. It's like
awful.
naming some town in Europe or the UK or something after some mass murderer. And well, there was a sort of retribution, and there was sort of a small war afterwards as a result. But so all of those things happened in the 19th century, and it wasn't that much different to today. And even you had those wars with the Causa, and I've read some, there was a guy who's a linguist and also an historian. Um, uh, his name was Job Stein, J.C. Stein, and he wrote a piece once where he said that um, at that time, a lot of the people had to go and plow with a gun because they could be attacked while they were plowing. And at times they had these thatch roofs and sort of as well. And at times they had to take off the thatch so that the Xhosas wouldn't come and burn their homes
Mm.
down. And even the women had to be armed all the time. And some of the women just lost their husbands because they'd been killed. And so we've been through all of that in the 19th century. So I think
I
that this is
suppose we thought
sort of
modernizing would take it out, take it away, but it seems like it hasn't. That's what I'm kind of hearing you say. This goes way back then, the level of violence. And
exactly,
it's almost like we expect in 2025, for some reason, we're going to all have progressed and shifted out of it and become a different type of society. But I think what I'm hearing you say is actually nothing's changed. This is how
exactly.
it's always been.
Exactly. That's the
We
thing.
shouldn't be surprised.
When you read history, then you get the impression that nothing has really changed, except that during the 20th century, I think there was a certain amount of stability, and the police were effective, and there was law and order. But the fact that the police tended to be, as in America as well. I mean, in certain areas, the police are fairly violent, and you've had all the. I mean, there was this whole thing around, yeah. I mean, the guy who um, got was supposedly suffocated by the policeman by this Derek
George
Chauvin,
Floyd.
George Floyd. That's it. And Derek Chauvin, is now
Yeah.
still in prison as a result.
That's
But
the whole
I think
BLM
that
movement.
yeah, I mean, the fact that our old police tended to be at times violent, they had to practice, the way I see it, they had to practice this kind of counter violence to keep the violence in check, as it were. But if there's no opposing force to this thing will just run over you completely, and it'll turn into complete anarchy. And I think that's more or less where we are now. And the only thing that's actually saving us now are these private security companies, of course, because there are 700,000, 700,000 private security officials in South Africa. It's twice the size of the police and the army combined. And you must know about the recent law that the ANC has just introduced to disarm
More
them completely. And if that had to
that
happen, then it will be complete chaos. I mean, imagine that,
more emotional terrorism from the ANC. You see what they keep doing to the white minority? It's more emotional terrorism. So on top of all the BEE laws and the Bella Bill and the expropriation without compensation, and we're going to take 3% of your business's profit as well. Then our president comes, then the government comes and says, oh, and we're going to whack you harder. and we're going to now not allow private security when we've got a law. And I'm like, what? I mean, I can only think that our government is deliberately trying to disarm and terrorize its people because that makes no sense. Why else would you do that?
Yes, you're
It's
perfectly
criminal.
right. It makes no sense unless they actually want to side with the criminals against the ordinary law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, and they to give the criminals even more leeway to just come and attack us.
And then they want to deny that we're in stage 6, 7, or 8 of a genocide as that process, because genocide is a process. Um, and then they go and do crazy stuff like this, make laws that make no sense, and then go into complete denial that there's a problem. When they do nefarious things like that. I mean, it's very nefarious.
It is. I know that these ANC people are evil. They are definitely. I mean, there was a lot of organized crime within the movement itself all along. I mean, they were involved in all sorts of rackets,
And they
smuggling.
are a criminal organization. Let's call a spade a spade. The
Mm.
ANC is a criminal organization.
Yes, exactly. If you had to make a list of all the crimes they had committed since 1994 and actually prosecute all the people involved and all their accomplices and so on. I mean, very few of the people in government would actually be outside prison. I mean, they would all be spending some time in prison for all the criminal acts that they've actually committed, all the fraud and theft and misappropriation of funds and everything that goes together with that.
And
Uh,
allegedly, also behind some of the targeted farm murders.
yes, yes, exactly. I mean, these farm murders are very sinister, and it's part of this whole process, as you say, to just annihilate us. But you're talking about those far left trolls and so on. That's the other thing about South Africa. I sometimes say that the Berlin Wall hasn't come down in South Africa in an ideological sense because we've still got so many Marxists and people like Malema who are proud communists and they've openly espoused communism and Marxism, and they openly advocating the nationalization of all land, expropriation without compensation. The law has been passed by the ANC. So they want to see some form of communist system in South Africa where uh, the middle class people, their property would simply be expropriated. But there's a more sinister side to it as well. I think that some of the leftists, they've actually put forward the idea that crime is a form of resistance of the poor or the against um, the bourgeoisie or the middle class.
But doesn't that tie back to what I was telling you earlier when I was asking about those maids that stole from me, those domestic
Yes,
workers?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, what you're just saying now. So in their minds, it's a form of resistance.
Yes,
That's
and you're probably going to find that there are a few university professors at University of Cape Town or Wits or some of the more left wing universities. Although all of them have now become left wing. I mean, there were some conservative 20 years ago. There were still a few conservative universities left, but they've all now been completely purged, and you've only got these extreme left wing people in charge and occupying all the important positions. And yes, they would argue that kind of thing in a slightly more subtle way, but in an academic paper that these criminals are actually just conducting a resistance against against the patriarchy or the capitalist system. So yeah, so we have to, on our side, we've got to actually critique all of this stuff
Yeah.
and motivate people to, on our side, to, you know, to resist the violence and to move to a better system.
Well, for me personally, I just go back to basics. And as a Christian, I just go back to the Bible and the word that no one likes, sin. Lying is a sin. Stealing is a sin. Murder is a sin. Okay. So you can write as many academic papers as you want justifying theft as resistance, but I'm going to just go back to the basics. And I don't care how many degrees you have and how academic your paper is and how beautifully you've justified it. Stealing is stealing. Stealing is stealing.
True.
It's
I think
not
it's
right.
those are the basic tenets of society that thou
Moral,
shalt not
it's
kill.
a
You know,
basic moral,
you
yeah, moral
yes,
code.
yes, there
Moral.
should be a moral
But
code.
communists don't have a moral code. That's the problem. We're trying to apply rationale and reason to people that are not operating from the same moral code as us. Because people that are radical trolls, that are leftists, that are these communists, don't have the same moral code. They
No,
they're
for
not
them,
operating.
the end justifies the means. You know,
Yeah.
so they've got this utopia, this egalitarian utopia in mind, whereas South Africa is now the furthest removed from egalitarianism than any
Mhm.
other country in the world. I think the top 10%, well, I think I tweeted it or posted it on X today or yesterday, that the top 10% in South Africa own 85% of the wealth. And it's the
That sounds pretty
highest in the
communist.
world, you know. And this we've had after 30 years of this quasi communism, supposedly, moving the whole society towards a more egalitarian distribution of wealth. Whereas, in fact, all the commissars have just been looting them, looting the place for themselves. And they've become the nouveau riche or the new capitalist class. Are these people in government and all their hangers on and cronies and their family members that are doing business with the government, while the rest of us have to struggle to survive.
I have to say, I'll admit it. It took me, I was in denial for a long time. I only really realized we were a communist country a couple of months ago. Like I actually, when I really started digging into politics, because it was there, but I didn't want to see it. I still wanted to believe we were like a democratic capitalist society, and all these signs were there, but I was like, I don't want to see it. And it was probably in about, I don't know, December, January this year. I think I put a post out on X about it where I just like had this like moment of radical acceptance of, you know what? Is it just me? Am I just a bit slow? But actually, we're living in a communist country. And it was quite a hard truth to swallow, you know. And maybe I was a bit slow, but I didn't want to accept it. Um, but now I have accepted it, and the truth hurts when you look around at what's really going on. It's pretty ugly. It's a pretty ugly, dark truth of what we're living in and what's
Well,
really going on.
to quote the very left wing Labour politician in the UK, Tony Benn, not so long ago, I saw a little video clip where he says that if you cannot change your government at the ballot box, you're not living in a democracy. And, at every election, they tell us to vote harder, but it doesn't help. I mean, this lot, they've now got 40%, they got 40% of the votes, but they're still in charge. So we don't have a democracy because we cannot get rid of them. They are there, they're ensconced in power. And of course, all their cronies and the so-called cadres, they occupy all the government jobs in the bureaucracy. So even if you do vote them out, they will still be in charge and they will still
The
be
rot
looting.
runs deep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you need a kind of I mean, the ANC is terrified of this notion of a counter-revolution because they see their takeover as a revolution in 1994. And they was talking about the counter-revolution. Yes, there was an hilarious thing that one of them said once, that crime is counter-revolutionary.
Well,
Is
Going
that
back
not
to how crime is rationalized again. I mean,
exactly, so,
oh,
but in
the
fact,
lost case.
no, I think crime is part of their system, and crime is
Yeah.
therefore revolutionary, and it's part of this, violent methods of violent change. That's classical Marxist
It's
Leninism.
evil justifying itself, really. It's
Exactly.
evil justifying itself. Oh,
So no, we've got a lot to think about, and people will have to mobilize themselves. But at least, all of the communication that we've got, and at least now the mainstream media is on the back foot because they've also always been, sweeping all this stuff under the carpet. I mean, they would report on the sensationalistic elements of crime.
but they're not even
But
doing that
yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Yeah, it's fair. Yeah, I think here and there in the Afrikaans media, you still get reports about crime, and I think in IOL as well, but it's only to kind of get some more eyeballs to their
If the
websites.
crime and the color of the skin of the crime matches the narrative, mainstream media, the leftist mainstream media will
Yeah,
feature
yeah,
it.
exactly. I mean, if they can have a perpetrator that looks like us, then I mean, the
Yeah.
thing would honestly be, yeah, then it would get hundreds of hours of airtime. But when it's the other way around, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Which is why a platform like X is so great because um, that's where the truth is. People are telling the truth. Where just people like me and like you go and share our stories and other people share their stories. That's where the real news is, when you actually just talk to real people. The media isn't the real news anymore. It's just propaganda for the government and for, whoever owns it.
Yes,
Real
you're
news,
right.
real news comes from real people on the
Yes,
ground living it.
true. After posting my little piece there about my own personal experience of theft and robbery and so on, and the burglaries that we went through when I was young. Oh yes, and I also once stole my car when I was still quite young, and it was, yeah, it's an awful experience. I actually had to. The first thing I did was I bought myself a bicycle, and I was lecturing
We
at
also got stuff.
university and in Durban at the time, and I had to cycle about 15 kilometers to the university and 15 kilometers back. At least I got fit in the process. But for a month or two, cycling, and it's not exactly like in Holland or Belgium or somewhere,
Mm,
or
that's hardcore.
Denmark, where there's infrastructure for that and where it's completely flat, so there were some really uphill stages in my daily commute by a bicycle, or I had to borrow a car from a friend. And there was for about 2 months, it was a complete crisis in my life, at the age of 24, 25. So, crime can really, I mean, and some of these murders and farm murders, especially, they destroy whole families, whole communities, whole businesses.
That recent story where that recent story in the media where that farmer's whole house was burned down. He was stabbed and shot. I think he was shot recently, literally like a month or two ago, and they burned his entire house down. I think it was in Joburg in one of the small holdings. Um, so yeah, his whole house just burned down.
Yeah, it's
For
something
what reason?
like something out of the Marquis de Sade, and people don't talk about that. But I do believe that, through literature and art, and also uh, maybe, yeah, talking about it, reasoning about it, we can overcome this problem. But we have to first deal with all the censorship around it and the suppression of information. And, you can't trust the police statistics in South Africa, I don't think. um, a lot of these crimes, these petty crimes that happen, there are millions of them, and they never even get reported. So even the statistics as they are already horrifying. I mean, there are millions of maybe 10, 15 million crimes per annum in South Africa, and but that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's actually more than that.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I did, for example, my Pringle Bay experience got reported. Obviously, that whole hijacking on the highway got reported. Car theft got reported. But when it comes to my other experiences, like my attack on the mountain, cell phone, I just stopped reporting crime a good few years ago. I just don't bother because I just lost faith. All the reporting went nowhere, you know?
Yes,
So it's
and the
probably
main
a
reason why
really bad
people
attitude
report
for me
it,
to have. But
especially
yeah, I just couldn't be asked anymore. I don't even bother, which is probably not a good thing.
well,
Um,
especially property crime, the only reason they report it is because they want to claim from the insurance. I mean, it's mandatory to put in
but I
an
knew when I
insurance
got
claim.
attacked, reporting that was what going to just add to the crime stats that aren't accurate anyways. No one was going to help me. No one was going to look for the guy. No one was going to catch the guy. And going to the police station and standing in the queue and going through all of that and probably being ignored and treated badly, it just wasn't worth it. You know? Um, I mean,
Yes,
it's probably
and
not
how
a,
many people feel like that? Probably a
yeah.
lot. So
The
yeah,
crime stats aren't accurate because I think there's just so much, and I'm guilty of it as well, unreported crime. Uh, and like you say, if there is insurance involved or whatever, people do report it, fair enough. But I think a lot of the time we just don't bother.
but I I think we need a strong movement to bring these things out into the open. And I've even thought that, with the internet and so on now, we could actually get each and every person in South Africa who's been a victim of crime to actually go to the police station or wherever and file an
He said,
affidavit.
don't use a state-owned entity. It'll have to be a
Yeah,
private thing. That's
okay, a
it.
private thing, go to a
Let's just be
lawyer, the
realistic.
commissioner
Police
of
station.
police, and
Yeah.
then write down what's happened to you under oath, and that's a piece of evidence. And then we should even file this internationally. If there are, say, 5 million affidavits of victims of crime in South Africa,
I think
crimes
in a
that
way but hang on, I think if you think about this refugee program that Trump has very graciously and
exactly,
generously offered, is actually in a weird way going to be a bit of a data system because part of getting accepted into that program is people having to give their personal statement and share their experiences. So in a way, the US government's almost ahead of the curve here. Because they're currently gathering that data and getting a real look into which our own government hasn't even done for us because they just want to cover it all up. But South Africa's been on the radar for a while, and I think this refugee program is really breaking open the lid off of what people's real experiences are. And I know that currently the embassy in Pretoria is doing interviews and is actually gathering information about people's very real experiences. And I know that a lot of people through this process have already DM'd me and shared with me. And we've already done our own little polls on X, and someone started a thread, and we all shared all the crimes we've been through. So we all went from childhood to now, kind of like this two-part conversation I've had with you, where we all listed our crimes, and everyone, no one just had one crime, even like you sharing your experiences, not just one off. We all had a long list. But I think your idea of having some kind of database where everyone could actually go and maybe a website or something and to get a real accurate thing would really be an interesting, almost horrifying experiment. Um, just to see how prolific crime is in this country, because I think like now we're starting to talk about it. Yay, finally these conversations are being had because we've all just been living in a state of emotional terrorism for the last 20, 30 years, just kind of accepting it. It's like being in an abusive relationship, It starts with a few boundary infringements here, a little bit of emotional abuse over there, and it's very subtle. So you don't really realize it's happening to you. And then the abuser pushes the boundaries more, which is what our president is doing. He's like pushing the boundaries more. It's been Bella, and then expropriation without compensation. It's like being in an abusive relationship and the abuse just escalates. And we haven't said anything. We haven't pushed back. We're still like, love me, love me, South Africa. And now we've kind of reached that point. It's like being in an abusive relationship where you're suddenly so deep in and you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, um, I'm being abused. And I think that's where we've kind of all reached now after 30 years. We've suddenly realized, oh my gosh, we're in an abusive relationship with our government. And we're being abused and we've normalized crime because it's all done so slowly. It's like the slow creep. And I think that's what's happened to us. And we've suddenly all gone now, recently gone, whoa. Well, that's what happened to me. It was suddenly like, whoa. I'm living in a total state of stress. I'm stressed about the NHI. I'm stressed about my health. I'm stressed about my old age. And it's just like escalating, escalating. And I just suddenly went, whoa, what is going on here? I just like emotional terrorism, just like another one. Now, as we're going through all of this, now the latest drop was now we want to take away private security. You see, it's like another, it's just like another emotional terrorism wave coming at us. Like we're literally being bombed. Um, so yeah,
Yes, I think
it's
the
crazy
reframing
time.
that it's that way as an abusive relationship between ourselves and the state or the regime,
Mhm.
that's actually a very useful thing. And it's, and I think it's a very creative way also at looking at it. And that's what we need. We need to get more creative to solve this problem. We can't just do the same thing over and over
Well,
again.
the first thing is, well, step one is is realizing we have a problem. We have a problem. Step two is naming it. I'm in an abusive relationship. Okay. So that's step one is like that is, and that is so powerful. It's just like actually getting to that, not in denial, not hoping it's going to get better, not hoping it's going to change. Okay. It's like, this is what's happening. It sucks. It hurts. It's horrible, but this is what I'm dealing with. And from there, you're now in a powerful position to say, okay, now what am I going to do about it? And some people are going to stay and fight, and some people are going to go. That's the thing. That's personal choice. That's personal life choice, you know, and each person's got to do what's right for them. But we've kind of got to this critical crossroads in our country now where it can't just stay the same. Something radical has got to give. It's like something's got to happen. And I think it is happening. I think with the sanctions coming, AGOA is threatened. I mean, and these are very terrible, terrifying things, but they kind of need to happen. We need something to, it almost has to be destruction for breakthrough, for, everything's got to kind of break to regrow somehow. It can't just carry on.
Yes, yeah, we've got to break with this past, with this horrible past that we've experienced over the last 30 odd years under this system.
Yeah.
And you're right. So it comes back to what I was saying, that we need our own kind of, I hate the word revolution, but and even transformation has been so, it's got all these connotations in South Africa. So you can't even use that word. But we need, I call it
Pushback,
fundamental change.
pushing back,
We need
pushback.
fundamental change, in Afrikaans, grondliggende verandering. That's what we need. We need fundamental change in this country to to
Radical change.
to save us. Yes.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think
Well, it's really been
leave it on that note.
yes. On that note, yeah, it's been nice talking to you once again, and I think we've made a lot of headway um, in talking about this problem. And please, in the comments and elsewhere, viewers can comment on this, and let's start this process of fundamental change and critiquing the system and the dominant ideology.
Yeah, so thank you for having me and thank you for opening up this conversation so that we can start talking about this stuff. And it's very healing to talk about this stuff as well. It's therapeutic and it's necessary. Um, and telling the truth is very powerful.
You're right. The truth, the truth will set you free. It's a cliche, but it's true. Yes. Okay. Until next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.